you. And it's I hear, I forget, I see, I remember, I do, I understand. I don't know whether it was Jim Lindsay or Terry McCosker that made me aware of that. Ideally, we'd be walking around the paddock and doing and touching and using all our 5 senses. The next best thing is bringing a few slides and hopefully have a look at the slides, and hopefully you'll remember a few things. We're overwhelmed by all this wonderful information here these last few days, so we're going to forget a lot of what we hear, but hopefully there'll be a few little memory joggers. As an introduction, I'd just like to show a little clip that a 3-minute clip that my daughter put together. No, something's wrong. Sorry. Thank you, Chris. How are we going? Right, so we're in the island north of here. So over 10 years ago, Martin Royds said, Bill Mollison, Alex Podolinsky, Alan Savory, Elaine Ingham. Start again. I'm naming some of the shoulders we're standing on. So over 10 years ago, Martin Royds was saying to me, Alex Podolinsky, Elaine Ingham, Bill Mollison, Alan Savory, Stan Parsons. We know Fred Provenza. We know them all. How many gurus are we waiting for? We need to get up and do something. And if I look at a gathering like today, Martin wasn't alone. And I thank you all for being here. And this, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and it's great to compare notes. So thank you for being here. And I thank Matthew for inviting me to come to Tasmania, so to share my story. So, as a young man, Dad was given the job to carve out a ranch out of Africa, a wild portion of Africa. This was in Kenya, back in on the slopes of Mount Kenya in the early 50s. That's where Dad learned firsthand about interspecies relationships and the importance of herds in the landscape. Later, he ended up in Rhodesia on a little mixed farm of his own. There wasn't much game left. A lot of the local game was already extinct, and the country was not productive. And yeah, so I grew up on the watershed between the Zambezi and the Sabi rivers. The water scarcity was an issue, and soil erosion was a given. As a dad used his cattle at high densities as a land management tool for the mulching, fertilizing, and pruning that they do. And as a passionate hunter, he proved to be a very effective custodian of local game. So on the little farm, we had the leopard, hyena, jackal, baboons, and we got wild pigs, porcupine. We had the kudu, the sable, waterbuck, and duiker, and then a few nocturnal species. And in the 70s, Dad reintroduced locally extinct species like impala, zebra, and eland. Dad was winning conservation trophies, but he wasn't making any money with cattle. So that dilemma was solved with photographic safaris. After the Rhodesian Civil War, we lost our farm. And having seen the writing on the wall, my family had already relocated to Switzerland, and that's where I finished my high school. So after the African bush, I got to see the wild side of Switzerland, the mountains, and just like the bush, if you don't abide by nature's rules, it's very easy to die. Got farming blood in me from both sides of the family, so I was looking for a place where I could regrow my roots. Europe was a bit too crowded. So in 79, I came to Australia. It was wide open spaces, land of opportunity, friendly people. You got some work for me? What's your name? Chris? Yeah, give it a go. No paperwork, no nanny state. It was easy. Yeah. As a young buck, I'd spent 8 months up north, mainly on stations, either motorbikes or cattle or horses with cattle work. Summertime, I'd go down south and race about in wool sheds, get a bit of cash and party and see people. It was what struck me very early in the piece was that in my opinion, Australia was pretty unforgiving. It doesn't matter how good you are as a farmer. If you've got all your assets in one rural proposition, 5 years of no rain will test you. So it was pretty obvious to me that if I was going to end up having something of my own, I'd have to have some sort of a financial backup plan. So in 83, with some partners and borrowed money, we started investing in real estate, just improving rental value, and it's that real estate game that's subsidized my learning on Kachana, and it's still part of the deal. So in 85, I first saw Kachana. It wasn't actually what I wanted, but it ticked the boxes and a whole lot more. We had sunshine, water, and limited soil, at least enough soil to run a small herd. And we're close enough and far enough from town. It's 45 minutes in the aircraft, start up to shutdown, which is, I know people down here, certainly in these parts of the world, we actually spend more than 45 minutes just commuting to work. So, that town was handy to have a town close by. The other thing is we had the obvious tourist potential would allow for diversification and reduction of risk. In 89, we got our lease, and then we had to create access. And I nurture this old-fashioned sentiment that farm families are an integral part of any society, or certainly any national economy. So the plan A was to have at least 3 families out there, and that was very easy to say as 3 bachelors as we were at the time. Now, 35 years later, we're still about 3 families short, but we keep on working at that. So Christmas 91, we moved out as a family, and Kachana became home. That was 97. Christina joined us in 90, 95. So by the time we actually moved out in 91, moved out in 91, we'd realized that something was very wrong. The actual areas that attracted us to that bit of land were disappearing and getting carved up. So the first thing we did is we got the ag department in and got them to do a stock take. This was one of the monitor site number 2. And with the blessing of the department at the time, we began experimenting by applying an African skin graft, so to say, onto an Aboriginal wound. The planting material was supplied by the staff at the research station, and the ideas were shared. We used new Australian plant species, deep-rooted plant species to hold the soils together. We used DADS, high-density, low-duration herd management to keep the plants healthy. And by 95, we had regained perennial stream flow, and we were seeing encouraging results. But the land was trying to tell me something, and something was missing. Something was not quite right. And then late 96, I had the chance to drive from Port Elizabeth up to Zimbabwe, so right through South Africa. I'd only read about the game and the antelope migrations in earlier years, and going through that landscape, it was like it was like a biological vacuum that I've went through. And then we visited our own old farm in what is now Zimbabwe. So I had 40 years of first-hand experience of what happened there. Then Dad invited Jackie and me to Kenya for a couple of weeks, and we enjoyed the scenery. And Dad was describing what was there many years ago, 60 years earlier, and what he was describing was not what we saw. So it was a pretty disconcerting, interesting, disruptive holiday. And we got back early 97, back home to Kachana. This photo was taken a fortnight ago. So this is what we have now, after actually having taken 900 SDHs out of there and still feeding our biggest mob of marsupials. So, but anyway, let's go back to 97. 97 proved to be a key year in a number of ways. Apart from a land act in WA that put us on the wrong side of the politically correct fence, I was given Tim Flannery's book to read. So, wow, a very long time Australia did have large herbivores. So as a blow-in from Africa, that was huge news to me. And then Terry McCosker came along and introduced me to the concepts of brittleness and succession and the teachings of Alan Savory, and I could finally begin to better understand what the land was trying to tell me. What we were dealing with really was like a cholera patient who can't absorb the nutrients and is dehydrating. The land was visibly dehydrating and wasting away in front of us, or like an autoimmune disease. The sunshine and the rain, life-giving forces, were actually killing life. So yeah, we had a problem. And what I'd already suspected that the land was starving, dehydrating, and burning up with a fever for months at a time. But what I then realized was to heal this, we need a lot more mouths and a lot more hooves, not less, which was the conventional wisdom. So what was missing was the gardeners of the savannah, more mouths and more hooves, strategically massaging the land. So that's when I needed to go back to school for the first time in my life. I did so willingly. My study of ecosystem function continues to this day, and for any other students, and especially for would-be students of ecology, with broad brushstrokes, I'll just go through Ecology 101. So this is actually a map. And in functional savanna systems, we have 3 teams at play. The sunlight harvesters, the producers, the consumers, and the recyclers, and they work for each other, using sunlight energy and water and to upcycle water, carbon, and nutrients. And the elephant's in there because, to remind us, it's the largest land-based herbivore left on the planet. And according to scientists, Australia lost all its large herbivores thousands of years ago, soon after humans first arrived here. So I say it's a map. This is where we are. Modern humans have become the apex predator and alpha consumer. There's nothing wrong with consumption per se, provided we play by nature's rule, which means production and cycling or upcycling needs to continue, and that's something we're not that good at as a species, but we're working on that. That's why we're here. Sunlight may be the fuel, and we've got plenty of carbon according to all the climate people, but without water in the right quantity at the right time, sunlight's not much good to us. So the right amount of water the right amount of water at the right time is becoming a limiting factor. Even in places like the Kimberley, we do get somewhere between that much and that much water every year. It's only not like an island; it's not spread around. It comes in pretty big dumps. So worldwide, we've found out that more grass is a very doable way that leads to more water. But on the tail of that, we've also know that unmanaged fuel loads tend to be ticking time bombs. And hence, in the absence of sufficient self-regulating herbivores, we need to manage what grows each year. And it would be totally naive to think that we can ever have everything under control. Where possible, we use our animals to manage fuel loads, only we don't have anywhere near enough to process what grows each season. So in practical terms, if we don't want to lose 100% of our ground cover every 3 years, we have to literally burn strategically a third of what grows every year, which is, as I mentioned yesterday, burning in savanna systems, you're short-circuiting the system. Regenerative pastoral practices are based on the understanding that in a healthy savanna system, that healthy savanna systems run on sunshine and that there's sufficient herbivores there to keep the vegetation healthy. When we first treat country, this is the sort of result we wanted. We're spreading nature's sunscreen. I'll be using, for the first treatment, I'll use animal densities up to 1,200 head per hectare. That doesn't mean I've got 1,200 head there. It means we bunch them up to get that sort of density to achieve the animal impact that we want, that we're after. So I've spent over 35 years riding in and walking in and flying over this particular bit of country, and I can see the results of this 3 to 5 year fire cycle. And I think I'd like to bear in mind that this is not country that supports Australia's beef exports. This is country that's largely abandoned by industry players, and that for obvious reasons, because if you want to make a buck, you've got to mine it. Yet, for centuries, this country was inhabited and was productive. And now such areas are out of mind and out of sight and dehydrating. And it's actually the country that grows our wildfires and a lot of the droughts and the floods. Just like to zoom in onto a little case study. That's Marshall Creek. So it's within walking distance of where I'm based. It used to be a wetland sponge. There has never been any mechanical disturbance in that area. For over 30 years, we've maintained 100% stock control, and the last fire was in 2005. We're only just beginning to halt the deterioration. If we get a fire in there now, even a cool burn, water's going to start running off faster again and take loose stuff with it. Soil erosion and loss of biodiversity will again accelerate. Season after season, bit by bit, we are losing sponge after sponge in many areas of the Kimberley, and possibly also in other regions of Northern Australia. So the photos were taken here. This is what it would have been the extent of the wetland sponge about 100 years ago. This is how much of the sponge has been lost since 1991. And I'm not sure that we can be growing organic horizons or building soil if we lay bare the ground every 3 years. I suspect that even if we were to introduce this level of complexity, we could not heal our subcatchments or rebuild our sponges if fire were our only tool. The deterioration would continue, only blurred because some species would hang in there a little longer. Next door, and in much of the region, the Australian Wildlife Conservancy is managing much of that country. They've only been at it for 20 years, but they're using fire as a tool. So hopefully they get accumulating quite a bit of interesting data, and we hope to compare notes. But yeah, we're all new at this. It's sort of the idea of reclaiming and rebuilding productivity and how to use the tools that are already there. Yeah, we haven't got any silver bullets at this stage, but we're learning, or we're trying to learn, and we keep on searching. The soil loss doesn't only take place in sponges. In terms of volume, soil remains North Australia's greatest export. I'd like to emphasize that first point there. In high rainfall areas, desertification is easily masked through seasonal fluctuations. And there's headlines every year that support my notion that the symptoms of by the time the symptoms of desertifying watersheds impact communities, no amount of remedial work downstream will reverse any dysfunction upstream. So we see here the Dunham River joining the Ord. The only reason why the Ord is clean is because there's upstream of here, there's 2 dams, and that slows down the water, and in exchange for the sediment load, we get cleaner water. Now we're up in the Dunham catchment, 120 kilometres upstream, and this is where the water begins to get its colour. This is an area where we've spent the last 40 years replacing herbivores with fire. And I reiterate, I'm not talking about country that's under sound pastoral management. I'm talking about country where conventional pastoralism is no longer feasible or is not feasible. The flooding actually begins higher up, and if you can see how you notice how the grass floodwaters have flattened the grass there. So the actual watershed is now a skeleton of a landscape with no soil left, so it sheds clean water. Now we go to the other side of that watershed. We're on Kachana. This is upper Cockatoo Creek, same skeleton of a landscape, same rainfall, also clean water because the sponges are long gone and there's no soil left. Now we're at lower Cockatoo Creek after rain on the range, and notice how clear the water is. So we use vegetation to hold the soil in place and to filter the water. And we influence herbivores so that they can exercise their natural function, which is to keep vegetation healthy. And Walter Yini calls them mobile biodigesters. So when we set up camp in 91, the country around us was crying for help. And today, lower Cockatoo Creek has reliable stream flow all year round. The water is now there because of the grass. May seem counterintuitive. The water is now there because of the grass, and the grass is now there because of how we influence the behavior of the large herbivores. And then in behind the large herbivores come the nibblers, which in our case is a range of marsupials, and they do their bit, but you could use goats or sheep as well. But anyway, there's a catch, and that has to do with the greater context. So we'll zoom out for that. The watersheds in the region continue to desertify, and this is not a unique pattern. And for the price of an airline ticket, we can do a trip into the future. So now we have a different context, a different continent, and more people, but the patterns match. So we have bare watersheds and bare catchments that dehydrate and erode. We have low fuel zones that remove the fire danger. We take advantage of nutrients that are washed into the valleys. Wildfire becomes less of an issue. However, droughts and floods increase. Then again, we have band-aid measures that boost GDP and create photo opportunities for politicians. Eventually production areas begin to dehydrate. People run out of water. Communities are in conflict. So for an idea of the social conflict, just look at the world news. The thing is that at the time, a lot of the decisions are very easy to justify, but actions do have consequences. And when you have dealing with complex dynamic living systems, actions often bring about unintended consequences. Dehydration is a leveler like few others. Olympic athlete, concert pianist, obese chain smoker, take away their fluids for 3 days, chances are their performance is going to be about the same. And it's the same at the landscape level. The best regeneratively managed farm cannot be sustained over time within a dehydrating and desertifying landscape. The best regenerative practice downstream cannot reverse ecological dysfunction upstream. It is my assessment that in Northern Australia the horse has already bolted, yet I believe we stand a sporting chance of reining him in. For that, we need a new generation of land doctors, capable and willing to work in country that is known to be inhospitable. And the basic skills that such land doctors will require, they already exist. They've been tested and are being embraced by industry leaders. Those skills are listed on the right hand side there, and let me just unpack that a little bit. So as stockmen, we ultimately influence all herbivore behavior. The key is grass farming. Functional herds grow healthy vegetation, and Christine Jones made us aware of liquid carbon pathways over 25 years ago. A rapid increase of photosynthesis can draw down carbon and begin to put it back where it'll work for everybody. The area of maximum impact is soil building. So healthy plants feed the organisms that build and maintain productive soil, and Eli Ningham explains very well what should be happening in the world below our feet. So we rebuild and fill up carbon accounts in and on our soils. And with a cattle enterprise, the easiest way to monitor success is kilos of beef per hectare. Water security and biodiversity are also very good indicators. Stockmanship and grass farming and soil building reward us with what I call rainfall management. Rainfall management is a result. It begins with sound pastoral practices. We end up hanging on to a little more water a little longer each season. Rainfall management allows us to rehydrate our soils, replenish groundwater and aquifers. So note, rainfall management is a result of blending stockmanship and grass farming with soil building. Climate is how we personally get to experience the interaction of these four simple but complex processes, beginning with microclimate. Climate building, once again beginning with microclimate, climate building is what needs to happen. It'll be achieved by rebuilding the buffering capacity of biology in the face of physical forces that are already aligning to determine our extinction as a species. Some years ago, Walter Yini said to us, or reminded us, that as she's done before, nature will again stabilize climate. And the question he left with us is, she going to do it now and with our help, or after and without us? I'm beginning to wonder, is she perhaps beginning to do it despite us? Because after all, we do live in a self-regulating system. Rainfall management, seen as a process, is a result of how we manage and influence these first three processes. Rainfall management will also determine our viability as regions, species, and as businesses. What is easy to forget is climate too is a result. Again, climate is how we experience the interaction of these four processes. So climate stability, which is what we're after, is we aim to rebuild nature's biological buffering processes and the buffering capacity. And we begin by rebuilding microclimate, then strategically growing that out into catchments and across regions. So armed with these sort of pastoral skill sets, we can now go about restoring ecological basket cases within useful timeframes. But let's get back to the elephant in the room. Remember, wildfire, droughts and floods grow mostly beyond managed production areas, so often in desertifying upper catchments that remain out of sight and out of mind. Do we want intact eggshells or do we want chicks? Fred Provenza reminds us change isn't the exception to the rule, it's the only rule. From what I've witnessed in my lifetime, apart from the 5 billion people we added to the planet, I think it's now too late to still be asking this question. So when the Salmon River self-destructed in 2001, nobody paid attention. When the Chamberlain did the same thing in 2011, nobody paid any attention. I thought that the $200 million price repair bill for Warman after the floods would have led to questions being asked. No, nothing's been done. At least we haven't addressed any root causes. Then last year, immediately to our southwest, the Fitzroy presented the taxpayer with a further $500 million in costs. There seems to be a surprising lack of scientific curiosity. People in power seem to feel that they're able to deal with these supposed effects of climate change within the confines of their caged workplaces some 3,000 kilometers away. The reality that surrounds my workplace dictates that healing and regeneration remain bottom-up processes. So even if our big city cousins wake up, and even if the regulators were to stop penalizing innovation, work that needs to be done must be driven by local enthusiasm and with community backing. Rebuilding the lost Cockatoo Creek sponge is one of my retirement projects, and after numerous setbacks, we hope to begin with that this coming year. One more slide before we get to the questions. As pastoralists, we can offer solutions that are family-friendly, community-friendly, low-tech, high-skill. Such solutions promise new knowledge, new skills, new jobs, new industries, and most importantly, new wealth. And this is what gives me hope for our children and grandchildren. And with appropriate incentives, land doctoring could begin at an industrial scale, just thanks to the fact that we already have an industry that's tested all these tools and has the skill sets that are necessary and has the tools. However, treating players in the industry like serfs or wage slaves or tax slaves is not going to cut it. That's not going to, Jackaroo's wages is not going to incentivize able-bodied young people to commit to land doctoring as a career. Brian Marshall asks, how do you tell an earthworm or a dung beetle what to do? The answer is, you don't. You create conditions for them to perform. So there's a vacuum for political leadership to step into. It remains my firm belief, from what I've seen, that if we trim the ecological sails accordingly, nature will fill them faster than we can imagine. So with that, I'm happy to field questions.
Thank you so much, Chris, with your enlightening stories and putting those things into practice. At the beginning of your talk, you said nature was trying to tell me something. And I think that resonates with all of us, but I don't think she's whispering anymore. I think she's... Oh, she'll use a baseball bat. I think she's speaking sternly. She might even be rousing on us quite loudly. So if anyone has, I'm sure everyone has a lot of questions for Chris. Anyone from the room up the back?
Yeah, Chris, thank you for that. So good. I'm interested in a description of the differences you've noticed between the fire management and the herbivore management. A bit more, going a bit more into that. Like, what are the different effects on the soil and the infiltration? Yeah,
I think we're a small enough room. Did everyone hear that question okay? No? I'm going to get Chris to just repeat the question. Could you repeat the question? Well, if you just ask me... I always forget. Okay, so just in a concise...
elaborating a bit more on the differences, the ecological differences between the fire management and the grazing management. Both of them well done.
Okay, so what are the ecological impacts of the fire management versus the herbivore management? If they're both well done.
I'll expand that question. We had a fire workshop a year ago, and someone pointed out quite correctly that not well done, we have two blunt instruments, fire and grazing. And I will say that we can actually turn those blunt instruments into precision instruments. They are tools in the toolbox, we just got to learn how to use them. It's just like a chainsaw. You can destroy a house or you can build a log cabin. That answer the question?
The different effects?
Oh, different effects, all right. Well, fire will bear ground, and depending on where you are, that's not ideal. And depending how healthy the standard ecological is, it depends. Now, I've got one example where, because I use fire a lot, I treated an area with the cattle, and we're talking about January, so middle of the rainy season. 12 o'clock, it was a sunny day. I lit a fire at the top of the hill. I went for a walk. I came back at 4 o'clock. The fire had gone out. It had gone down the hill, hit a fence line. The tape was gone, the pickets were there, but it really followed the fence line. And the reason why it stopped at that fence line was because the cattle had created the mulch, just like where you're standing on now. That still held moisture from the rain from the night before. The grass that had been pruned was photosynthesizing, was healthy, and the grass up the hill slope where it hadn't been treated with cattle, that was senescent and aerated and dried through the sun, so that just burnt. Yeah, so but it depends. It's like, you can see someone with a grader or a chainsaw or any tool. They're good operators, they're bad operators, and then sometimes you've got the wrong tool you make do with what you got. But at the end of the day, we're talking about tools. We've got to learn to use them and work with what we've got.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think a lot of the things that we learn here aren't like one size fits all, because where everybody is, it depends on what tool you use. And from what you've said earlier and what I've listened to, it's about trusting your gut and looking at the soil and looking at your landscape and looking at the tools that you actually have to navigate and which ones you use at which particular time.
Correct. Trust your gut, because your gut will tell you you've got questions to ask. But we've got to be asking more questions. And always the other thing is trust you, but you also need to know where you want to get to and reference yourself to where you want to get. And that's the question that I have is, do we want to reference ourselves to what we're about, what was reported to be here 300 years ago, or do we reference ourselves to what seems to have been happening in these landscapes thousands of years ago before we started mining this biological and natural wealth? And I think with 28 million people on the continent exporting nutrients to another 60 million people offshore, we need to be referencing ourselves to the productivity and natural wealth that was there before humans started taking it down. And I'm not being racist here.
Thank you, Chris. Helen?
Yeah, thanks. I think the conversation about tools, we don't have to use tools in isolation. So that you can do a fire and then follow up with grazing, and it comes out very well in a brittle tending seasonal environment. And so I think it's about the combination of tools that we use, and it's our creativity that allows us to use the tools in multiple ways to get the best possible outcome. And referring back to what Chris was saying about what we want the landscape to look like well into the future, and applying the tools and the combination of tools that will move us in that direction. So we tend to think of things in isolation, but when we merge tools and combine them, we get far better results.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. For anyone who didn't hear that.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. And just I talked about that fire that came down the hill. So I used technology to contain the cattle, so electric fencing, technology, took that away, the cattle, the animal impact, the biological energy and biological tool that I managed, and then I used fire. So I used all three tools.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. There's more. Yeah. And you can use them differently. Yeah, depending on where you are and what's going on. Yeah. Yes.
I just wondered, Chris, how many, you talked about 1,200 head of cattle you had, and just your day-to-day management, how often you're moving them over such a big property like that, and how many head you have in what sort of size paddocks.
So the question was around the figure of 1,200 head and how you manage them. 1,200 head per hectare as opposed to 1,200 head. Right.
So the key is density. Think of a windsock flapping in the wind, and there's air going through that. Plenty of air, enough to pump up a tire. But if you actually want to pump up a tire, you've got to put it through a compressor. Putting animals together is you harnessing that animal energy, and that's the density, and that's what gives you the pressure, and that does the work. So I will get 1,200 head per hectare density with 60 head or 80 head or 120 head. It's just how I put them together, and I'll work with to get, and then I know what sort of impact I want, and then I'll take them off. But to give you an idea, the friend of mine, Martin knows him, Hendrik O'Neill was one of the pioneers of ultra high density grazing. So Hendrik was running herds between 300 to 500 head. He was running them in 10 to 15 meter wide strips with a herder on each side and one guy in the front shifting that tape every 20 minutes. If those animals wanted water, they had to just stop. They couldn't turn around. They're like densities of 2,500 head per hectare. And if he wasn't happy with the work at the end of the day, he'd march those animals up and down that strip to get that impact that he wants. So it's understand we've got a tool that runs on solar energy, and it's well, I'm sold on it. I'd like to say, hey, it's the greatest opportunity we've got out there. We've got a renewable energy that we could use in a time when there's energy scarcity.
The gent in the red top.
My question is, so with 50 or 70,000 years of Aboriginal fire management, once the megafauna disappeared, what did the land look like then before colonisation? And the second part of that is, you know, the vegetation was shaped by megafauna before fires, and then fires reshaped.
That's me. Everyone, turn your phones off.
Mine's in there now.
Megafauna, you know, they would have shaped the landscape and the vegetation, and then fire has reshaped the vegetation. So, but can you see that effectively mimicking megafauna can still impact on that fire-shaped vegetation? Or I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but
So I think the question is, what did it look like before people arrived, and can we recreate that?
well, you're trying to recreate something that might have existed more than 70,000 years ago before.
Yeah.
Right. It's not about recreating what was there. It's not about recreating the way we did it. It's about recreating the function that was there. So Terry McCosker says if you've got an accident victim, someone's been run over a truck, what do you give him? Chemotherapy? He says, yes, cancer patient gets run over by a truck. Do you give him chemotherapy, or do you just drag him off, stop the hemorrhaging? Stop the hemorrhaging first. What we're focusing towards health and productivity. And we have enough models, and it doesn't matter which continent you're on, we understand the fuel is sunshine. The way it gets into biology is through photosynthesis. We may have different players, but the functions are the same. So once again, let's have a look at I don't know how many vets there are here. I'm not a vet, but give me an elephant, I'll find its lung and I'll find its heart, and you might have need a chainsaw. Give me a mouse, I'll do the same thing. They look very different, but the function's the same. Now, you know, if Africa produced the heavyweight boxers and America produced the basketball players, perhaps Australia produced the ultramarathon runners. I don't know. But we do know how the continent functions. So savanna systems function basically the same way on all continents. Wetland systems function basically the same way on all continents. Forest systems function basically in the same way on all continents. And if we want to sustain biology, we've got to be replacing the natural wealth that we've mined as a species, and we look around and we say, well, how was that natural wealth built in the first place? And we discover these functions. We may discover a lot more. And in fact, I'd be very surprised if we don't find a lot of self-regulating tendencies that actually appear as we start rebuilding function. It's just like healing someone. You know, first aid, and then you start. At some stage you have a patient-carer relationship, and you find out what were they doing or what can they do, even if they speak a different language. It's the same with these landscapes. You know, we're dealing with ecological basket cases, and I'm saying let's get health back and let's get productivity back, and then hydrate first, and then at some stage, hopefully our grandchildren can pursue the academic debates of what the hell they want to do with it.
Thank you, Chris. Listen, I think we could go on for a lot longer, but unfortunately we have to wrap it up. I urge you to catch up with Chris and pick his brains. He's going to be around for the next 5 or 10 minutes. There's so much more we could talk about, Chris, and I just want to thank you so much. I mean, you are the ultimate land doctor. You're asking for us to be land doctors, and you've set a path for us. And I just feel like keep the faith. You're doing a brilliant job. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to just mention, let me just point out the obvious. Here's the ultimate land doctor. The next generation, we can have all the wisdom we want. If the next generation doesn't pick up the ball and run with it, we have a problem. And even if our game isn't as good as it could be, we've got to keep the game going. And welcome, you're the sort of land doctor we want.